Sign it, Jack. I blinked, staring down at the divorce papers my wife Lisa had just slapped onto our kitchen table. My own hands were trembling, but hers were steady, perfectly manicured nails tapping against the edges of the stack. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a nightmare wrapped in legalese. She wasn't just walking out on me, she wanted my permission for her sick arrangement, right here in the home we'd built together. And standing right behind her, a mocking, self-satisfied smirk on his face, was Chris. Her lover. Her new, whatever the hell she thought he was. Lisa leaned in, her gaze cold and unyielding, her lips curling into a slight sneer. You're going to sign these papers, Jack. You're going to give your consent, and you're going to let me and Chris live our lives, right here. I'm done pretending with you. Her words hit like a sledgehammer. I'd suspected something was wrong for months, felt her pulling away, making excuses, hiding things. But I'd chalked it up to stress, to distance, even to the usual ups and downs of marriage. Never in my wildest nightmares did I expect this, my wife brazenly demanding that I give her the green light to carry on her affair. In our home. I felt my throat close up, my mind scrambling for any words, any sense of understanding. Lisa, what are you saying? You expect me to just let this happen? She scoffed, folding her arms. Oh, Jack, don't act so surprised. We haven't been us for a long time, have we? Chris and I, we have something real. Something you wouldn't understand. I glanced over at Chris, standing there with his arms slung around her shoulders, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. He looked at me with an expression of pure disdain, like I was some pitiful obstacle in his way. Jack, he said, his tone laced with mockery, you've had your turn. Now it's my time with Lisa. I'd suggest you sign those papers, make it easy on yourself. Let us live our lives, or things could get messy. The threat hung in the air, thick with unspoken consequences. My eyes darted back to Lisa, searching for some trace of the woman I'd married, the woman I thought I knew. But her face was stone, her expression unapologetic. She wasn't ashamed or conflicted, she was resolved, completely willing to burn everything we had to the ground just to be with him. Why? I whispered, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. Why would you do this to me? To us? She rolled her eyes, exasperated, like I was the one being unreasonable. Don't be so dramatic, Jack. This is what I want, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. You can either accept it, or you can make this difficult. But I promise you, making it difficult won't end well for you. Before I could respond, Chris stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. Listen, cuckold, he sneered, drawing out the word like it was an insult he relished, if your life means anything to you, you'd better accept the situation and stay out of my way. Your wife is mine now, and I like it that way. I felt a surge of rage, hot and blinding, clawing its way up my spine. But just as I took a step forward, two large men entered the room, standing on either side of Chris like silent bodyguards. They crossed their arms, muscles tense, eyes cold and watchful. The message was clear, resistance would be met with consequences. Chris smirked, glancing at his thugs before looking back at me, utterly unthreatened. You're outnumbered, Jack. Outmatched. So do yourself a favor and sign. It's the only way you'll keep some dignity. I felt the room spin, my thoughts racing, a tidal wave of emotions crashing inside me, anger, betrayal, humiliation. Here I was, alone, outnumbered in my own home, faced with the twisted reality that my wife had brought not only her lover but his hired muscle into our lives. Lisa's voice sliced through my thoughts, cold and dismissive. Sign the papers, Jack. Let this go. It's over between us. Accept it. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make them feel the pain they were so casually inflicting on me. But I knew this wasn't the time. I was trapped, humiliated, and completely blindsided. My fists clenched at my sides, but I held back, swallowing the rage that threatened to consume me. This wasn't over. They might think they'd cornered me, that they'd stripped me of my power, my pride. But I would make them regret underestimating me. As I looked back at Lisa and Chris, a new resolve burned within me. They'd turned my life upside down, but I wasn't about to go down without a fight. Not now. Not ever. For now, I'd play their game. But they had no idea what was coming. I gripped the pen, my knuckles white, as Lisa tapped her foot impatiently. Chris's smug grin stretched wider, like he'd already won. I could feel their eyes on me, both of them waiting for me to just cave, to scribble my name on that dotted line and seal my own humiliation. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I set the pen down carefully, refusing to let them see me crack. "Fine," I said, my voice low and steady, fighting back the venom boiling inside. "I'll sign it, but not today. You're not just going to throw this at me and expect me to roll over without reading what I'm agreeing to." Lisa's jaw tightened, but Chris only chuckled, as if he found my defiance amusing. "Sure, Jack," he sneered, arms crossed over his chest. "Take all the time you need. But don't think for a second that this is negotiable." I forced a nod, barely containing the urge to wipe that smug look off his face. "I'll be in touch once I've had a chance to review it," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as I could manage. "You two can figure out your own sleeping arrangements tonight." Turning my back on them felt like walking off a cliff, but I knew I had to get out of that room before I lost control. I could hear them whispering to each other, laughing under their breaths as I walked away. I felt like a fool, like the whole world was laughing at me, and for the first time, I didn't know what to do. But I knew I wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. As soon as I was out of sight, I grabbed my phone and dialed my friend Mike, one of the few people I knew I could trust with something like this. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful until he heard the edge in mine. "Jack? You alright, man?" I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Mike, I need a favor. And I need it now." Mike didn't hesitate. "Name it." I told him everything. Every sordid, humiliating detail, how Lisa had brought Chris into our home, how she tried to force me to sign away my dignity, how she'd hired muscle to make sure I stayed in line. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then Mike let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Jack. That's some cold stuff. Are you sure you're safe right now? Physically? Sure. But mentally? I'm barely hanging on." I paused, gritting my teeth. "I need you to help me find someone, a good lawyer. The kind who doesn't just handle divorces but fights. I'm not walking away from this empty-handed." Mike's tone turned serious, all traces of casual conversation gone. "I know just the guy. Name's Sullivan. He's ruthless, doesn't back down, and he's seen all kinds of crazy. If anyone can handle this, it's him." A weight lifted off my chest, just hearing Mike's confidence in this Sullivan guy. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a starting point. I had a way to push back. "All right," I said, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since this nightmare had started. "Set up a meeting for me. As soon as possible." I could practically hear Mike nodding on the other end. "Consider it done. And, Jack, hang in there. Don't let her or that guy break you." As I hung up, I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to let Lisa and Chris destroy me, no matter how many threats they threw my way. They'd gotten cocky, thinking they'd already won. But they had no idea what they'd unleashed. The next day, I met with Sullivan in his dimly lit office, a place that radiated quiet power and a certain ruthlessness. The man himself was sharp-eyed, with a no-nonsense demeanor that instantly put me at ease. After I explained my situation, Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. So let me get this straight, he said, his voice laced with barely hidden disgust. Your wife brings her lover into your home, tries to coerce you into a humiliating arrangement, and expects you to play along like a docile pet? I nodded, feeling a swell of anger as I relived the events of the previous night. Exactly. And she's got him backed up with a couple of goons to keep me in line. Sullivan's lips curled into a tight, humorless smile. Well, Jack, I'll tell you one thing, they made a mistake underestimating you. And an even bigger mistake underestimating me. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with intensity. Here's what we're going to do. For the next hour, Sullivan laid out a plan, a strategy that was more than just legal maneuvers. It was a way to reclaim my dignity, to put Lisa and Chris in their place, and to ensure that I wouldn't be their pawn. By the time I left his office, I felt like a new man. I had a plan, a purpose, and I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was on the offensive. This wasn't just about salvaging my pride, it was about making them realize the price of their betrayal. The game had changed. And I was finally ready to play by my own rules. As I walked out of Sullivan's office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I could breathe again, think clearly. I wasn't just the helpless husband anymore, standing by while his life fell apart. Now, I had a plan. A ruthless, calculated plan, and it was about to shake their little fantasy world to its core. For the next few days, I acted exactly how Lisa and Chris expected me to, submissive, quiet, broken. I played my part, letting them believe they'd won, giving them exactly what they wanted to see. Lisa seemed pleased, tossing smug glances my way whenever she passed, and Chris? He took every opportunity to smirk and snicker, treating me like the defeated man they assumed I was. But they didn't know about the recording devices Sullivan had discreetly set up throughout the house when Lisa and Chris had been out. Every conversation, every smug little plan they whispered, every mocking laugh, I was capturing it all. Sullivan had made it clear, evidence was power, and I was going to gather enough of it to bring their entire scheme down. One evening, while they were out, I sat in our living room, flipping through the recordings. Sullivan was right, the things they said when they thought no one was listening were more than just arrogant, they were downright incriminating. The disdain they had for me was nothing compared to the way they bragged about their setup, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me, about how they'd planned every last detail. You think he's actually going to go through with this? Lisa's voice echoed through my headphones, dripping with contempt. Honestly, Chris, he's so pathetic. I wouldn't be surprised if he's too much of a coward to sign. But either way, once we're through with him, he'll be out of our lives, and we'll have everything. Chris's laugh came through next, smug and mocking. Oh, he'll sign. If he doesn't, we'll make his life hell until he does. Let's see how long he lasts with the pressure we're putting on him. It was sickening to hear, but each word, each piece of evidence I collected, fueled my determination. They thought they had every advantage, but they were handing me the very weapons I needed to dismantle them. A few days later, I made my move. I walked into the kitchen, where Lisa was sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up when I entered. "Oh, look who decided to join the living," she said, smirking. "Are you finally ready to sign, Jack?" I forced a smile, keeping my voice steady. "Actually, Lisa, I am." She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my sudden change of tone. "Really? You're ready to accept that this is how things are going to be?" "Yeah," I said, nodding slowly. "I've had some time to think, and you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe this arrangement will be better for everyone. I'm done fighting." She watched me for a moment, a glimmer of suspicion in her eyes, but then Chris entered the room, his usual swagger in place. Well, he said, smirking as he looked me over. "Looks like someone finally grew up. Good to hear you're going to be a reasonable man about this, Jack." I kept my face neutral, biting down every ounce of disgust I felt. Yeah. I just want this to be over. If this is what makes you happy, then I won't stand in the way. Lisa looked at me, a bit surprised, then shrugged. Well, I'm glad you're finally seeing sense. Now, let's get those papers signed and get this over with. Of course, I replied, keeping my tone light. But first, there's one last thing I need to do to clear my head. Call it a peace offering. Chris narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? I motioned toward the front door. Come outside with me. I want to show you something. Something that'll make all of this easier. They exchanged glances, clearly curious. With a shrug, they followed me out to the driveway, where I'd parked my old car. I unlocked the trunk and stepped back, gesturing for them to take a look. Chris leaned forward, glancing inside, his face suddenly twisting in confusion as he saw the small digital recorder I'd placed there. What's this? I gave a small, cold smile. That, Chris, is the evidence I've been gathering. Every word, every sneer, every threat you and Lisa have thrown my way in the past few weeks. It's all there. And guess what? Sullivan, my lawyer, has copies of everything. Lisa's face went pale, her confidence draining in an instant. Jack, you wouldn't. Oh, I would, I cut her off, feeling the power of the moment. You thought I was going to just roll over? You thought I'd let you walk all over me, in my own home? You were dead wrong. Chris stepped forward, anger flaring in his eyes. You think this changes anything? You're bluffing. You don't have the guts to follow through. I met his gaze, unflinching. Try me. Sullivan's already got everything he needs to press charges. Extortion, coercion, threats. It's all on tape, Chris. And if either of you even tries to push me again, you'll find yourselves in a courtroom before you can blink. The color drained from both their faces. Lisa's mouth opened and closed, scrambling for words, but she knew as well as I did that there was no talking her way out of this. For the first time since this all began, I saw fear in her eyes, and it was the most satisfying thing I'd ever felt. I gave them one last look, letting the weight of my words sink in. I'll give you one chance. Take your stuff and get out of my house. I'm filing for divorce on my terms, and I'll make sure neither of you get a single cent. Or we can let this go public, and you'll both lose far more than you bargained for. They stood there, stunned and speechless. For once, they were the ones caught off guard, the ones left scrambling. And I could see it in their faces, they knew I wasn't bluffing. The silence in the driveway was heavy, thick with shock and, for the first time, fear, and it was all theirs. Lisa's face had lost every ounce of color, her confident smirk replaced with a mask of disbelief. Chris's anger flickered into panic, his posture no longer smug but tense, like a predator suddenly realizing it was cornered. I took a step back, watching them process the reality of the situation. They had tried to break me, to turn my life into their playground, but the tables had turned, and they knew it. Finally, Chris found his voice, though it sounded far less cocky than usual. You really think you can get away with this, Jack? His attempt to sound threatening was almost laughable now. This little game you're playing? It's not going to end well for you. I let out a dry laugh, genuinely amused. Oh, Chris, this isn't a game. You and Lisa turned it into one the second you decided I was just an obstacle. I'm simply ending it. I nodded toward the recorder, still nestled in the trunk. All of your dirty secrets, all the mockery, the threats, are right there. And trust me, Sullivan's already prepared to unleash it all if you so much as breathe the wrong way. Lisa took a shaky step forward, the veneer of confidence finally cracking. Jack, this doesn't have to go this far, she said, voice quivering, a pitiful attempt to sound reasonable. We can work this out. You don't need to destroy everything. Oh, now you want to work things out? I scoffed, the anger surging again. You're only saying that because you're out of options, Lisa. Don't think for a second that I'll fall for that. Her face twisted, the mask of desperation giving way to something sharper, colder. You're really willing to burn it all, aren't you? After everything we had? Everything we had? I repeated, feeling the absurdity of her words like a slap. You destroyed that the moment you decided to bring Chris into our home, Lisa. I'm just finishing what you started. Chris stepped forward, his eyes dark with a mix of anger and something else, something that looked suspiciously like fear. Listen, Jack. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can work something out. Let's talk this through like men. I laughed bitterly, enjoying the reversal. Funny, coming from the guy who brought his thugs to keep me in line. You wanted to play rough, Chris? Here it is. No one's talking their way out of this. I watched them both stand there, momentarily at a loss, as they realized the situation was truly out of their control. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally breathing, finally seeing everything clearly. The power they had stolen, the self-respect they had crushed, was back in my hands. And it felt good. Here's what's going to happen, I said, keeping my tone calm, controlled. You're both going to pack your things, and you're going to leave. You'll sign whatever document Sullivan puts in front of you, and if you even think of contesting it, those recordings are going public. Your bosses, your families, everyone will know exactly what you did. You'll be exposed for the manipulative, heartless people you really are. Lisa's face twisted, her expression hardening as she realized the reality of the situation. You can't do this, Jack. You don't have the guts. I took a step closer, meeting her glare with every ounce of strength I had left. You thought I didn't you? That's where you both miscalculated. You mistook patience for weakness. But let me make this crystal clear, I am done playing the fool. Chris, who had been quiet, finally erupted, his face turning red with fury. You'll regret this, Jack. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're nothing but a washed-up, pathetic. Save it, Chris, I cut him off, my voice cold as ice. I'm done listening to you. Get out of my sight before I decide to hit send on those recordings right now. The finality in my tone must have hit home, because he backed off, clenching his jaw, visibly struggling to contain his rage. He looked at Lisa, then back at me, before storming off toward the house, muttering curses under his breath. Lisa lingered a moment longer, her face unreadable. I could see something flicker in her eyes, anger, maybe even regret, but it was too late. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. Goodbye, Jack, she finally said, her voice laced with bitterness, and without another word, she turned and walked back into the house. I stood there, watching them disappear, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. They had taken so much from me, tried to break me in every way possible, but here I was, standing tall. They'd lost, and they knew it. And while there was a sting to seeing my life with Lisa end in this way, there was also a feeling of liberation, of finally being free from the twisted grip they'd tried to keep me in. As I headed back inside, I felt a rush of clarity, a sense of purpose. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of something else. A life that was mine, where I'd never let anyone use or humiliate me again. For now, I'd let them leave in silence. But they knew that if they ever tried to interfere again, I was ready, armed with every weapon they'd so foolishly handed me. The game was over, and I had won. The house was finally quiet. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it was mine again. There was no Lisa sneering in the kitchen, no Chris lingering around like a shadow. Just silence, and the faintest echo of the storm that had blown through and finally cleared. I took a deep breath, absorbing the moment, letting the realization sink in. They were gone. After weeks of torment, manipulation, and betrayal, I'd taken back control. And as much as a part of me wanted to feel relief, I mostly felt empty, as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. There was a lot of work ahead, emotionally, mentally, and even legally. Sullivan, true to his word, had made sure I'd have the upper hand in the divorce. He had been meticulous with the paperwork, ensuring that not a single penny would go to Lisa or Chris. All those recordings, all the threats and coercion, had given us the ammunition we needed to protect my assets and my future. But even as the legal battles felt secure, there was still the hole left by the person I'd once thought was my partner. After the adrenaline wore off, reality settled in. That evening, the house felt bigger and emptier than ever. Every corner, every room held a memory, the good, the bad, and the lies. I found myself wandering through the house, reliving fragments of moments that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. How had it all gone so wrong? How had I missed the signs? The questions echoed in my mind, taunting me with no real answers. The next morning, I decided to tackle the remnants of what Lisa had left behind. The closets were still filled with her clothes, her shoes lined up in neat rows, each pair a bitter reminder of the woman she had become. With every item I packed, I felt a mix of anger and sadness, a sense of betrayal that stung deeper than I'd ever let myself admit. It took hours, but by the end of the day, I'd cleared every trace of her from the house. I piled the boxes in the garage, ready to ship them off to wherever she was now, and closed the door, shutting out that chapter of my life for good. With her gone, the house felt lighter, like a weight had finally lifted. This was my home again, a place that belonged solely to me, where I could rebuild without the shadow of her betrayal. In the following weeks, I began to carve out a new routine, filling the silence with purpose. I focused on my work, poured myself into projects I'd neglected, reached out to friends I hadn't seen in months. Slowly, I found myself coming back to life, rediscovering the things that made me who I was before Lisa had twisted her way into my world. And with each passing day, the pain dulled, replaced by a quiet resilience. But life had a strange way of testing you just when you thought you'd found your footing. One evening, as I was sorting through old emails, a new message popped up in my inbox. It was from Lisa. "Jack, I know you're probably the last person who wants to hear from me right now, but I need to talk. It's important. Please, just give me 5 minutes." I stared at the message, a storm of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, resentment, and, strangely enough, a curiosity I couldn't quite shake. Part of me wanted to delete it, to slam the door on anything she had to say. But another part of me needed to hear her out, if only to finally close the book on everything she'd put me through. After a long moment, I replied with a simple, curt message: "Tomorrow. Noon. At the cafe on 7th. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table near the window where I could see her coming. A part of me dreaded the meeting, while another part felt an odd sense of satisfaction knowing that she was the one coming to me now, reaching out after everything she'd done. Lisa walked in a few minutes later, looking different. Gone was the smug confidence, the cold arrogance. She looked worn down, like the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. She spotted me, offering a weak smile as she approached, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity before reminding myself of the person she'd become. "Jack," she said quietly, sitting across from me, her hands fidgeting on the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I didn't bother with pleasantries." "What do you want, Lisa?" She flinched, as if the bluntness of my tone had caught her off guard, but quickly composed herself. "I know I don't deserve this, but I wanted to apologize. For everything. I made a mistake, a terrible one, Anne. I hurt you. I hurt us." I watched her, waiting for the punchline, the manipulation, the next twisted demand. But instead, she looked genuinely remorseful, her eyes downcast, her voice trembling. "I thought I wanted something different," she continued, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought Chris was. I don't know, some answer to things I felt were missing. But I was wrong. He's not who I thought he was, and I was too blind to see it. I crossed my arms, resisting the urge to let her words affect me. And what does that have to do with me now, Lisa? You made your choice. She nodded, looking defeated. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I wanted to tell you that you deserved better. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. A part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to see her finally admit the truth. But another part of me felt nothing, like she was talking to a version of me that no longer existed. I took a deep breath, keeping my gaze steady. Lisa, you made your bed. And now you're lying in it. I appreciate the apology, but it doesn't change anything. You hurt me in ways I can't even describe, and no amount of regret can undo that. She looked down, silent, as if she'd expected my response but still hoped for something else. After a moment, she stood up, her voice barely audible. I understand. Goodbye, Jack. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The wounds she'd left might never fully heal, but in that moment, I realized I was finally free. She was out of my life, out of my mind, and I could move forward without the weight of her betrayal holding me down. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. And the future, whatever it held, was finally mine to claim. After that final meeting with Lisa, something in me shifted. I hadn't expected closure from her, hadn't believed her apology could give me peace, but somehow, hearing her admit her mistakes felt like the final piece falling into place. It was as if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. For the first time, I could look at my life and see a future that wasn't tainted by her betrayal. I started reclaiming the parts of my life that I'd let slip away, piece by piece. My home, once a place of painful memories, was transforming. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, even bought myself a few new things, simple, meaningful choices that made the space my own again. And as I worked, a sense of satisfaction settled in my chest. I was building something new, something just for me. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen admiring the renovations, my phone buzzed with a message from Mike, my close friend and confidant through all of this. Jack, it's been too long. Let's get a drink. It's on me. A part of me hesitated, but only for a moment. I'd spent so much time alone, wrapped up in my own thoughts, that the idea of reconnecting with the outside world felt both intimidating and exhilarating. I replied with a quick, I'm in, and within an hour, I was out the door, heading to the bar where Mike and I had met countless times over the years. The bar was buzzing with life, filled with familiar faces and laughter. As soon as I walked in, Mike spotted me and waved, grinning from ear to ear. There he is, he shouted, clapping me on the back as I took a seat beside him. You're looking good, Jack. A whole lot better than the last time I saw you, that's for sure. I chuckled, feeling the truth of his words. Yeah, things are finally turning around. And I have you to thank for a lot of that, Mike. Don't think I've forgotten. He waved me off. You'd have done the same for me, brother. Besides, I just gave you a little nudge. You did the hard part yourself. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of happiness. No shadows, no bitterness, just the simple pleasure of a night out with a friend. As the evening wore on, Mike and I shared stories, laughed about old times, and even joked about the absurdity of my situation. It felt good to laugh about it, to realize that the hurt and anger no longer had a hold on me. At one point, as we were reminiscing, a woman at the bar caught my eye. She was laughing with a group of friends, her eyes sparkling with life, and for a moment, I felt a strange urge to introduce myself. I hadn't thought about dating, hadn't even entertained the idea of someone new, but something about her, the openness in her laughter, the warmth in her smile, reminded me that maybe, just maybe, there was more waiting for me out there. Mike must have noticed because he nudged me with a smirk. "Go on, Jack. You've earned it." I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't know, Mike. One step at a time." But as the night went on, I found myself relaxing, the idea of new connections, new possibilities, taking root in my mind. Maybe it was time to step out of my comfort zone, to open myself to whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, life took on a new rhythm. I threw myself into work, spent more time with friends, and even picked up a few hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. Running, photography, even a little bit of cooking, things that felt trivial before, but now gave me a sense of purpose and joy. And, surprisingly, I found myself thinking about that woman from the bar. Her laughter, her smile, the simple joy she exuded, it stayed with me, a quiet reminder that there was life beyond the pain I'd endured. One evening, I returned to the bar, partly on a whim and partly in hopes of seeing her again. To my surprise, she was there, sitting by the window with a book in hand, sipping a glass of wine. I hesitated for a moment, nerves fluttering in my stomach, but then I reminded myself of everything I'd overcome. I wasn't the same man I was a few months ago. I had faced the worst, come out the other side, and I was ready for whatever life had to offer. I walked over, clearing my throat as I approached her table. "Mind if I join you?" She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise before a warm smile spread across her face. "Not at all." As we talked, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I didn't tell her everything, some things were too fresh, too raw, but I shared pieces of my story, enough for her to understand that I was rebuilding, rediscovering myself. She listened with an openness that felt rare, her empathy shining through in every word. Her name was Emma. She was kind, funny, and full of life in a way that felt like a breath of fresh air. She didn't pry, didn't push for details, just let me be myself, unburdened by judgment or expectation. It was simple, easy, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. Over the next few months, Emma and I grew closer. She became someone I looked forward to seeing, a reminder that life could still be beautiful, still be full of promise. She never tried to fix me, never asked me to forget or move on too quickly. She simply supported me, a steady presence as I found my footing again. As my relationship with Emma blossomed, I found that the bitterness, the anger, the resentment toward Lisa and Chris began to fade. Their betrayal no longer defined me, it was just a chapter in a much larger story, a story that I was still writing. And one evening, as I sat with Emma, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I was finally free. Free from the pain, free from the betrayal, free from the shackles of a past that had once held me captive. This was my life, my story, and I was ready to live it on my own terms. Emma took my hand, her warmth grounding me, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had found something real. Not just in her, but in myself. I had survived. And I was finally ready to thrive. With Emma by my side, life felt like it was unfolding in vibrant colors once again. Every day brought a new sense of hope, a steady reassurance that I was capable of rebuilding, of creating something meaningful from the ruins of what had come before. Emma had become not just a friend or a confidant, but a source of joy and resilience in ways I hadn't thought possible. One evening, as we were walking along the beach, our hands intertwined, she turned to me, her face thoughtful. "Jack, I know you've been through so much, and I admire how you've handled it all. But, have you ever thought about what you want next? For yourself?" Her question lingered in the air, soft yet profound. In the past, I would have brushed it off, too wary of looking beyond the immediate present. But now, with everything that had happened, I felt ready to answer. I admitted, glancing at her, feeling a warmth in my chest. I want a fresh start. I want to be someone who doesn't look back with regret but looks forward with purpose. I want to keep building a life I'm proud of. She smiled, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. That's all I hope to hear." We spent the evening talking about dreams, ambitions, things we wanted to do and see. It felt liberating, as though every word we shared carved out a new space for something beautiful to grow. And as the sun set, casting shades of gold and orange across the waves, I felt something settle deep within me, a contentment I hadn't known I was missing. A few days later, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope was formal, stamped with a lawyer's insignia, and I immediately felt a jolt of apprehension. When I opened it, I was met with another surprise. It was a settlement offer from Lisa. Apparently, her life had taken a rough turn after we'd parted ways. According to the letter, Chris had left her, drained her financially, and left her scrambling to rebuild. It seemed like poetic justice, but seeing it on paper only made me feel empty. There was no satisfaction in her suffering, only a strange sense of closure. She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. I consulted with Sullivan, who reviewed the letter, his expression amused. "Looks like she's desperate," he remarked, glancing up at me. "She's offering to settle on your terms. No alimony, no demands, just a clean break." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief. "Let's finalize it, then. I want her out of my life for good." Sullivan wasted no time, and within days, the paperwork was signed, sealed, and sent back. It was official. Lisa was out of my life completely, and I was finally free, not just legally, but in every sense of the word. The chains of the past were gone, and all that remained was the future I was carving out for myself. In the weeks that followed, I felt an unburdened sense of joy. Emma and I continued to grow closer, and my friendships, strained during the turmoil, began to flourish once again. Mike, my ever-loyal friend, threw a small party to celebrate my newfound freedom, and as I looked around at the people who had stuck by me, I realized just how lucky I was. One evening, as Emma and I were sharing a quiet moment at my place, she reached out, taking my hand. "Jack, I just want you to know, whatever happens, I'm here. No matter how messy life gets, I'm not going anywhere." I squeezed her hand, feeling an overwhelming gratitude for her presence. "I know. And I'm more grateful for that than I can say." As time passed, our relationship grew deeper, and slowly, we began to talk about the future. Marriage, a home together, maybe even a family someday, things I hadn't allowed myself to dream about since everything with Lisa. And with Emma, those dreams didn't feel scary or impossible, they felt right, like the natural next step in a journey I'd been meant to take all along. One quiet morning, as we sipped coffee on my porch, watching the sun rise over the horizon, I turned to her, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "Emma, I think I'm ready to take the next step. With you." Her face lit up, her smile so genuine, so full of love, that I felt a warmth I hadn't known I was missing. "Jack, I've been waiting for you to say that." And just like that, my life came full circle. The pain, the betrayal, the struggles, they all seemed like a distant memory, a necessary chapter in a story that had finally found its purpose. Emma had brought a light into my life that I hadn't even known I was missing, and with her, I felt ready to face anything the future had to offer. This was the life I'd been searching for, the peace I'd fought so hard to reclaim. And now, with Emma beside me, I could truly, finally move forward. Months later, Emma and I stood in the center of our new home. It wasn't a mansion or a luxury estate, but it was ours, and that made it perfect. The walls were painted in soft, warm colors, sunlight streaming through the windows, filling the space with a comforting glow. Mike helped us move in, cracking jokes as he carried boxes and giving me a hearty slap on the back as we unloaded the last of our things. "Well, Jack," he said, grinning as he looked around, "you did it. You really made it through to the other side." I nodded, smiling as I took in the view. "Yeah, I did. And I couldn't have done it without you." Later that night, as Emma and I sat together, surrounded by unpacked boxes and laughter, I thought about everything I'd been through. The betrayal, the heartache, the anger, it had all seemed like too much to bear at one point. But I had survived, emerged stronger, and found something beautiful on the other side. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice soft as she murmured, "Are you happy, Jack?" I didn't even have to think about it. Yeah. Happier than I've ever been. Looking back, I knew I wouldn't change a thing. The pain, the lessons, the journey, they had all led me here, to a life that felt truly my own. And as I wrapped my arm around Emma, watching the stars through the window, I realized that this, finally, was home. This was the end of my journey. And it was just the beginning.